All right, folks, part two of the Malzberg panel. Columnist for Breitbart.com and American thinker C. Edmund Wright, and Forbes contributor Carrie Sheffield. Let me ask both of you about a New York Times story today, which speaks out about what has been very, very obvious. And that is that 2 years ago, when Israel went at it with Hamas, you heard the Arab world condemning, and you heard country after country speaking out. But now you hear deafening silence from the likes of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and it is very, very telling, Edmund, that as the former foreign minister and former U.S. ambassador from Israel said to us earlier in the show, that there's a whole new world out there, and it's a whole new world that recognizes, at least within the Middle East, that Hamas is bad, and they don't want any part of Hamas either because they feel threatened.
Well, and you know what? It seems like that perception's finally catching up with reality. Steve, for decades, the reality has been that Hamas hides its weapons behind its children, and Israel hides its children behind its weapons. So there's never been any moral equivalency, and maybe it's kind of like the gun debate after Newtown. Finally, there's been a critical mass of understanding of what the issues are, and sort of the knee-jerk liberal reaction is no longer, worldwide.
Carrie?
Yeah, no, I want to temper this. I think part of it is Hamas has alienated its own allies. So it pissed off Iran because it refused to back the government in Syria. It backed the Muslim Brotherhood, which was toppled in Egypt. So I wouldn't say necessarily that these guys are becoming that much more warm and fuzzy. I want to see the proof in the pudding. But, I mean, it is somewhat positive that these other states are starting to speak out. I mean, but there are other states that are filling in that void, like Turkey, for example. I mean, the President Erdogan saying that what Israel has done is worse than what Hitler did to the Jews. I mean, that's incredibly offensive, especially coming from a NATO country.
That's it. You make my point. Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, Carrie, not to interrupt, but how on earth could this country be a member of NATO?
Yeah, no, it's pretty mind-blowing. And also Doha, I mean, Qatar, where the head of Hamas is hiding out in Doha, and getting funding from other Arab states. So while there may be a few, as the New York Times suggests, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, we'll see what actually happens.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very interesting the rest of the way as world opinion certainly goes after Israel. Both of you, I thank you both, C. Edmund Wright and Carrie Sheffield. Thanks for being on the panel. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
All right, folks, so we are going to continue this line of questioning when it comes to the Middle East with Alan Dershowitz. That's right, the one and only Alan Dershowitz. And as I've told you folks, I see him on CNN especially, surrounded with two other guests who are basically pro-Palestinian, a host who is basically, in my view, pro-Palestinian, and it's stacked 3-1, and he just does great work in speaking what he believes to be the truth. And we'll be back with Alan Dershowitz after the break. But first, before we even get to Alan, we're going to get to Alan. Now, what am I talking about? Well, here's a You and the Law segment with Alan Dershowitz. And here he's going to talk about police records.
Have you ever been stopped by a policeman for a traffic violation? Of course you have. Millions of Americans are regularly stopped by the police for traffic violations and other reasons. Now here's the question. Is it legal for you to surreptitiously hit the record button on your smartphone and tape the conversation with the police? Well, it all depends on which state you were stopped. If you were in about a dozen states like Massachusetts, California, or Florida, don't go near your record button. In Massachusetts, the top court has ruled that recording a policeman is a crime unless you tell the cop you're doing it. Many states have privacy laws that make secret recording of anyone illegal. And in some states, you're free to record the policeman in the exercise of their duty, but not to record other ordinary citizens. Illinois passed a draconian law saying that if you tape a police officer on the job, you could face as much as 15 years in prison. An appellate court overturned the law, and the Supreme Court upheld that specific ruling, but it failed to rule on the issue as a whole. The Massachusetts case was particularly egregious because the cops were spouting racist talk to an African-American driver who recorded the conversation to protect himself. Instead of the cop being fired, the victim of the racist talk was prosecuted. Bad decision, but it's still the law in that state. In 38 states like New York and Virginia, it's legal to turn on the record button, but don't do it. In general, I advise you not to, because if the policeman catches you, he might figure out some way of getting even. And don't forget that in almost all states, it's legal for the police to audio and videotape you. Many police, even on traffic stops, have microphones attached to their body and are recording your comments. In other places, the police have video on the hood of their car and they're recording your movements. So don't forget that fact and remember your state laws and act accordingly. I'm Alan Dershowitz for Newsmax TV.